And drive through the day when this gets explained that the animals come out at dark. Now the cash town dried up, we never lie, but you should. Yeah, you should. And it's rescued from the beating away. Grind your teeth until they grind away. Rub these bones till they roll away. Come on now. Who knows? Who cares? Anyway. With a note that said lost here in Texas, you just hit the road. Now the guy built some birds.
My man, Spivey. Killing it. He's just killing it, murdering it. If you guys have not partaken of Spivey music, definitely check it out. Multi-talented artist. And they don't get much better than Ryan Spivey. So definitely support Spivey music. Today we have a bang-up show. This is going to be crazy. We have Jay Matthews. He's a UFO researcher and blogger from Chester, Northwest England, who now lives in North Wales. And he's always had a fascination with the paranormal, ufology, which started with a sighting he had as a 14-year-old boy. And since then, he's searched for answers, which have led him down a rabbit hole of this misunderstood subject. He now runs a successful page on social media, that's where I found him, which is dedicated to helping to find those very answers. Jay Matthews, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna go everywhere we can. I think Jay and Ryan are gonna have a mighty good old time. And I'm super excited. So stop over to Hero Paranormal. Check it out. Go to heroparanormal.podbean.com. You know, I don't care what you do. Just listen to future episodes. Keep in touch with us. And with no further ado, Jay Matthews, welcome to the Hero Paranormal Podcast.
Thank you. It's been a long time coming, this one, hasn't it?
Oh, man, we've tried so hard for this one. If people only knew.
Exactly. We got there in the end.
It's like everything was working against us. It was Murphy's Law times 10. And we just stayed the course and we're here. It's great.
Yeah, finally there. Okay, so where do you want to start, buddy?
Well, yeah, I wanted to get into, I've been seeing some of the YouTube videos online, and you're in them. Some beautiful scenery in the background. I wanted to get into some of your sightings. Not just the most recent, but also some of the early ones when you were a boy. And I guess, what direction should we start? Should we start with the early ones, or?
Yeah, we can start from childhood. So I was always brought up in, I'd say, a religious setting. My mum is born-again Christian. I was made to go to Sunday school every Sunday. It was always sort of drilled into me that there was something else out there. So, I don't know if that set the tone for me being inquisitive to anything to do with the paranormal or UFOs. But it goes back to my mother's childhood, actually, where my mum's a kidney patient. She has dialysis a few times a week to make sure her kidneys still function. And literally as a child, she was given overnight to live. They didn't think she was going to make it. It was looking pretty bleak. Now, she swears to this day that she woke and saw an angel stood by her bedside. obviously my mum went on to make a recovery somewhat. You know, she was able to birth me. So in a nutshell, my childhood's always been kind of, I don't want to say regimented, but, you know, I was always made to believe that there's something else above us, higher than us. So, cut long story short, you know, as a young kid, I begrudgingly went to Sunday school every Sunday and, you know, said my prayers and everything else. And I got to the age of 14 and my father had passed away probably about six to 8 months prior. I moved into my father's old bedroom, more for comfort reasons more than anything else. And I can only describe this as how I remember it, because obviously you're talking over 20 years ago, but I remember being in bed and I woke to find this bright light in the room, which was like when you have a thunder and lightning storm, lightning strikes nearby and it illuminates everything in the bedroom. And this light woke me up. I went to, we had a big bay window at the back of the house and sort of rubbed my eyes, got up and walked to the window expecting to see, you know, the police helicopter, you know, looking for someone with the searchlights on. So I've gone up to the window. This light is absolutely blinding. It's illuminating everything in my backyard and the neighbour's backyard. And I couldn't see anything above the house. You know, I'm looking through the window, I'm looking up, and you can just see this crazy light come from the sky. So I had the idea, and I don't know why I did this, but I opened the window. I sort of stuck my head out the window and was trying to look past the eaves of the house. And I could see it was like a straight outline, but it was huge. And literally, I'm looking at this outline, trying to make out what it is. There's no sound, completely silent. And what I remember is everything was eerily silent, because this would have been about 3:30, 4 a.m. in the morning, just before dawn broke. And there was no bird singing, which there usually is sort of that time in the morning. So basically, I heard a loud bang behind me, you know, which made me jump. You know, startled, turned back around to the window, and whatever it was gone. I told my grandmother about it, because it was my grandmother's house that I was living in. My grandmother sort of rubbished the idea that it was anything strange or untoward. Because I think he even mentioned to her, you know, something about along the lines of it being a UFO. Because it was nothing like I'd ever seen before. And what you remember is 1994, I'd have been, 14. So there was no internet back then. There wasn't many books on the subject, at least not that I'd read at the time. So I went to school, and, you know, it wasn't the kind of thing that you spoke about at school with your friends, because, you know, there was a lot of ridicule. You know, people would kind of take the mickey, and, you know, it wasn't something you spoke about. But my best friend, a guy called Lee, lived about two streets behind the house. And he said he woke early in the morning and went to his window to look out. And he says to this day, he doesn't know what made him go to the window. He said he went to the window and he could see this light, and he was immediately drawn to it. And over my house was this huge triangular craft. He said it was black, you know, because bearing in mind this is, I say 3:30, 4 o'clock. So, you know, the sky's starting to go lighter. And he said this thing was as black you could see. There was just this light from what he presumed was the centre. And it was over the house. So I put that to the back of my mind. As you do, these things kind of scare you when you're a kid, and I'd seen the movies Aliens and, everything else. And I decided not to provoke it. And I had some strange paranormal goings on thereafter, where I moved back to my parents' house, and we'd have things like these strange instances that happen, and I'd get in trouble for them. And it'd be like, before I went to bed, there'd be like shampoo all up the walls in the bathroom, like shenanigans going on, if you will. And of course, my parents were like, well, your stepdad hasn't done this. My mum saying she hasn't done it, so it left me. I used to get punished for these things. And, at that age, you kind of thinking, is my stepdad doing this? Is there more to this? So this went on for a number of years, and, through that I sort of got labelled as a black sheep in the family. It's only now when I look back on all of this that you start to notice all these strange instances happening. So we get to I'm probably about 20, 21, and obviously you got the internet then, and I started looking into a lot of UFO sightings. I hadn't had any other sightings, after that first one when I was 14. I started looking into UFO sightings, more because I wanted answers. And, I'd seen these videos. There was the Belgian UFO flap with the triangular craft that was spotted. There was several other videos, and obviously now, people say they're TR-3Bs or the Astra craft, and they're ours. There's some dispute about that. So, basically, all these strange accounts that I've kind of gone through in my teenage years had sort of made me curious. So I was searching for stuff online, obviously came across all the mainstream stories like Roswell and some of the bigger known stories. And this really sort of piqued my interest, because I didn't know to this degree that there was this level of information out there. I'd read a few books. I think I'd read Timothy Good's books around that time. But other than that, nothing was forthcoming. And I wanted to know more. Maybe provoked by what I'd seen as a teenager. It sort of had my curiosity there and then. So I decided to look into this a little bit more. And, through the 2000s, I'd seen a few things in the sky which I couldn't explain. And again, the thirst for knowledge and to find out what these things are leads you back to the internet. You do some research, you look at a bunch of YouTube videos. And this got me to the point where I decided to create a Facebook page called Ufology UK. And I say, back then, all I really knew was, all the mainstream stories that you see on the History Channel and on these TV shows. I hadn't really looked into any of the other sightings. There wasn't a great deal out there at the time. It was kind of sort of regurgitated, same stories and different opinions and whatnot. So I started the website, and as you know, once you delve down the rabbit hole, there's kind of no going back. And as I started to learn more about this subject, I started to have encounters with what I can only describe as shadow entities. I'd moved back from London. I'd have been 29, 30 years of age. And I moved back to London to my parents' house. And I'd wake in the middle of the night, and I'd roll over in bed, and I'd see these very tall, faceless black shadows stood over my bed. I'd always be gasping for air like I was having a panic attack. Now, I've never suffered a panic attack lucid, so I had nothing to compare this to. And these things were terrifying. I could make out, other furniture that was in the bedroom when I'd see these things. And then literally it'd stop. I wake up the next morning kind of confused and, did a Google search and it came up, a bunch of things like sleep paralysis and, various medications can induce these things. And a friend sent me, I think it was a Coast to Coast interview where the late Art Bell had done a show talking about shadow entities. So I had listened to this show and I kind of started to discover that there's a lot of people out there that have had these experiences. And these instances would happen almost nightly. I got to the point where I was kind of scared to go to sleep. And they got worse in nature. Like there's a couple of instances where I've had the duvet ripped from me. I guess I'd wrap myself in the duvet for, some kind of security or to feel safe. I do have to state that all my ex-girlfriends have said I don't stir in my sleep. When I fall asleep, I stay confined to one spot. I don't roll around. I'm not restless. But I'd wait to find this, I'd feel the sensation of the duvet being ripped from me by these tall shadow figures. I'd wake up and the duvet cover would be down the end of the bed. There was an instance where I felt like I was pulled from my bed and I woke to find my head was about 3 feet away from where my pillows were and my legs are hanging over the side of the bed. And again, it's, scared the hell out of me. And shortly after, I'd moved in with my then girlfriend, Claire, and we moved to a house in Wrexham. And, everything was going well. She knew about my interest in UFOs. I was doing more and more research and looking into a lot of these subjects a lot more and a lot closely. And these experiences with these shadow beings followed me. And, she'd say I used to wake up and I'd be sort of screaming in my sleep. And I always felt like, I was paralysed with fear. I couldn't do anything about these beings being there. I don't know what they were doing. They were always sort of crouched over my bed. So anyway, I wake one day and my ex-girlfriend, and you'll laugh at this, she remarked that there were scratch marks on my back. And she sort of joked that, I'd been playing away with another woman and, all the jokes came out in regards to that. And I'd become friends with a guy called Jason Gleaves, who's a really good image analyst on things like UFOs. And he'd give me an ultraviolet torch shortly before this happened. And he'd always, sort of said that abductees, if they're marked and they're taken, a lot of things aren't seen with the naked eye. You shine a UV torch on them and it will show up a lot of things that you can't necessarily see. So I told him about these scratch marks, and at the time he was the only person that I told about it because, who do you tell this sort of thing to? About them, looking at you like you're going crazy. So he advised me to go into a dark room, shine the UV torch on my back and get Claire to take some pictures and send them to him. And what appeared was it almost looked like I'd been branded on my back, and the pictures are on my Facebook. You might have seen them, Ryan. I literally only got the photos back recently because they went missing for a number of years. But people have said it looks like a word find. Some people have said it looks like there's numbers. because you can make out what looks like a 2 and a 1. Again, I don't know what this means. It has no relevance or significance to me at this point in my life. You know, needless to say, this nearly pretty much scared me off looking into this subject further than what I did. Anyways, me and Jason went to this UFO convention in Lytham St. Anne's, and one of the speakers was staying at the hotel we were staying in. And in the evening, we went back to the hotel and we sat in the bar area having a few drinks. And for some reason, something spurred me to go and listen to this guy. He had a table with about 14 people around it, and they're all telling him about their experiences. And, you know, I sort of sat patiently and listened. And when the time was right, I decided to speak up because, you know, I wanted answers about all this weird stuff that had been going on in my life. So, cut a long story short, I spoke to him about him. He said it was a very real phenomenon. He also told me that these things feed off fear. They're almost parasitic in nature. And he advised me to use like a passive colour nightlight. And, you know, I've been using that ever since. He did sort of go on to say that, you know, I was protected and these experiences would pretty much stop overnight. And they did. So I returned home. I was kind of happy that, you know, all these experiences had stopped now with these shadow beings. But this is where the sightings got a lot more frequent. And he said to me, well, one of the strange things he'd said, and I kind of almost took his comment tongue-in-cheek, as you do when you meet some of these people. And he said, you know, after speaking to me, one of the things that will happen to you is you'll see a lot more UFOs, and, you know, the rate you're seeing them, it's going to be pretty full on. And, you know, you kind of take these comments on board and, you know, you go away with them and you think sort of nothing more about it. As I say, I went back home. And my ex-girlfriend, she was aware of my fascination into this subject, but she didn't want to understand it. If I'm honest, the subject, obviously when you go deeper into some of the issues that present themselves, she didn't want to know. You know, it scared her. So we're stood looking out of our bedroom window one evening, and it was a beautiful clear sky. And where we lived in Wales, it overlooks a place called World's End. There's like a lot of moorland, and you know, there's like all these hilly areas, if you can imagine, in Wales. It's pretty desolate and pretty remote up there. I turned around to her and I said, you know, because I think she partly believed a lot of the stuff that I'd said and the sightings that I'd had when I was a teen. But, you know, it's one of them, unless people see it with their own eyes, they can't fully understand what you're going through. So I commented to her as we're looking out this window, and I said, I would absolutely love it if you would see something right now that would appear to you that you could have absolutely no explanation for. And literally, I'm talking seconds later, we're looking out this window, looking at the night sky and the stars and Venus and whatnot, and this star-like object appears in the sky, really bright, the brightest white I've probably ever seen. And this thing starts moving towards the house. So we kind of look at each other. She's, you know, picking a jaw up off the floor. And I run downstairs and I run into the back garden. And by the time I've got into the back garden, this thing's literally going over the house. Now, you know, we've got Liverpool Airport is, you know, in our flight path. We've also got an Airbus factory, which is pretty close by. So we're used to seeing, all kinds of aircraft going over, and also our RAF Valley isn't too far away. So this wasn't a plane, and I say this thing was flying silently. I can only say it was like a beach ball-sized orb of this brilliant white, and it just flew silently over the house. And from there on in, I sort of became known as the UFO guy or the weird guy. And literally, pretty much every time I would go outside to, at the time I smoked cigarettes, I'd go outside to have a cigarette in the back garden of an evening, and we'd see these brilliant orbs flying over it. And there was people there with me who weren't believers of UFOs or a lot of this phenomenon. They were witness as well. And, again, I've not asked to see anything like this, but it was almost like this phenomenon was presented itself to me. This has gone on for as long as I can remember, and obviously more recently, I've had some pretty major sightings. One was a daylight sighting, which the pictures are up on my Facebook, the videos are on my YouTube channel, where we've looked at these things, and they're pretty spectacular in nature. So, yeah, further down the rabbit hole we travel, and onwards we go.
You mentioned so many things that rang true with what I consider exactly kind of like my path of life as well. Like these times when you are able to see behind the veil. And I think you mentioned that, you knew from an early age there was something above. Did you realize there was also something below as well?
Yeah. Obviously, when it comes to sort of Sunday school scholars and the teachings, I was very aware of, my mum had spoken about demonic entities and, the dangers of getting involved in anything like that. And, like as a young teen, I remember, and this was just after my father passed away, and I'd met this girl in a place called Northampton, and her family were really into the occult, and they were into like ghost hunting and whatnot, and she suggested doing a Ouija board. And I went to the house, and again, tongue in cheek, I'm kind of always been one of those personalities that I have to see something to believe it. So we did this Ouija board, and the Ouija board spelt out a nickname that my father had for me. And it wasn't something that I shared with these people. They wouldn't have known this. And I was kind of blown away by that. And, being quite open with my mother at a young age, I told her about this. And one of the things that came through on the Ouija board, that I had a guardian spirit that was a dog. Now, my mum being a Christian, her interpretation of that is obviously a lot of darker stuff, as you're talking about, is spelled backwards. So, in her mind, dog equated to God. So when she thinks perhaps I attracted something bad back then. So, I was very aware of, both sides, light and darkness. After the Ouija board, it kind of scared me off. It was a bit too real for my understanding. And, I kind of was left with the opinion of there are things out there that maybe you shouldn't provoke. We all search for answers. We all want to hear from our loved ones when they pass. Perhaps there were things out there that, forces, if you want to coin it that you shouldn't necessarily go prodding unless you know exactly what you're doing.
I couldn't agree more. I think there are definitely forces that whether you acknowledge them or not, they're there. And by the time you realize it, sometimes it's too late, at least in many cases. Great minds of ufology have alluded to the possibility that some of these entities are demonic in nature, and actually some governmental programs. In fact, there's been a lot that has been declassified in documents. Is there a possibility that this is possibly demonic, I guess? And I'm talking, I'll just say it. I'm talking about ATIP, OSAP, TTSA, just things that have been alluded, others as well. I don't want to get in. There's a long list of individuals. Yeah.
Well, this is kind of what started my fascination with the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. Basically, it's I do think there's a lot out there, and I do tend to believe that it's all connected in the same instance. I think a lot is on vibrational frequency, and when people allude to being awoken, I think it's a case of like when we've got the receiver, and we're tuning in a radio station, or all of a sudden, we find our favourite radio station, and boom, those messages are coming through. And I think it's somewhat similar in the sense of, if you want to allude to these being demonic, there's speculation recently that some of the things that have been seen and the things that have been released publicly, there's a bit more to it than, little green men flying craft around. And I started to look into Skinwalker Ranch as a consequence of this. And, it fascinated me because, this one place, obviously, you had a lot of UFO sightings there in the whole Uinta Basin. But also the phenomenon that was seen on the ranch. I think it was Eric Davis that spoke about the tunnel appearing. This tall, shadowy figure comes out and it's elbowing its way out of this tunnel and climbs out of this tunnel, which they could only see through night vision, I believe. And it climbs into our reality and then just runs off into the darkness. So there's an awful lot to it, and obviously when you hear about all this phenomenon happening on such a grand scale as on the ranch, it kind of reassures you that, one, you're not going mad, and two, that this stuff is all pretty much connected. And I know you've got different facets. You've got cryptozoology, you've got people that look into demons, and you've got the religious aspects of that. And then you've got, the nuts and bolts UFO fanatics. And they all kind of like have their own little interest and their own little niche groups. But really, they need to come together because a lot of this stuff goes hand in hand. And looking into events, what happened in the ranch, I don't know if you want to talk about these things being dimensionals or interdimensional. But I believe when I'm going back to talking about the vibrational frequency thing, I think, obviously we can only see through the naked eye. I think it's 2 and 3D. So what if there are dimensions behind that you have to be in tune to necessarily see these things? The events that were going on at the ranch, perhaps, there's some sort of dimensional portal where all these dimensions intersect, and the epicenter seems to be the ranch.
Yes, I can't agree more. And the dimensional aspect is hard to escape, Jay. It could be demonic. There's a possibility. Sure, like everything, there's good and bad people. Why wouldn't there be good and bad of this?
Yeah, well, one of the stories that stood out to me was when the young man came to meditate on the ranch with the ranch owner, Terry Sherman, I believe. And, he sort of invited himself onto the ranch. And, he was, 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 he was approached Terry and I think his son and said, he had to meditate in a certain place on the ranch up by the first homestead. And he goes out, and he's kneeling down and he's got his arms open. And I think the story goes along the lines of, Terry and his son are watching and they saw something which I believe was like opaque to the scenery behind, perhaps on Skinwalker Ridge. And this thing runs towards this man and just lets out this one almighty roar. Scares the living hell out of this guy. This guy comes running back. He's hanging onto Terry Sherman's leg. And, he says to Terry Sherman that, the devil is there. It's Satan himself. Now, things like that, these people are in tune. I think, I just think there's so much going on there. Whether the land's cursed from, obviously the Navajo and the Ute tribe that frequented that area, I don't know. But there's definitely more questions than what there are answers when it comes to that place. And equally, there's more of these places around the world. We went to a place called Benton to look at the work of a chap called Paul Sinclair. And Paul's been researching this area for over 20 years now. And his story, I'd say, broke mainstream in the last few years because initially I believe he was looking into cryptid sightings where in the area there had been this Dogman. And this goes back for hundreds and hundreds of years that people have seen this thing. And you're talking about 7 to 8 foot tall biped, heavily muscled, face like a wolf. And so I started looking into this story, and I got to meet Paul, had a good long conversation with him. And I realised he spoke at an event I went to, it would have been around last June in Manchester. And he spoke about this area called Benton. And up to this point, I was only aware of the Dogman sightings. And basically, his whole talk was on this area, which is on the northeast coast, just underneath the seaside town of Scarborough. And he alluded to this place being somewhat of a UK Skinwalker ranch because the same type of phenomenon that was happening on the ranch in Utah was presenting itself in this area off the northeast coast. And the story has it all. You've got, there's an old redundant RAF base which sits on the cliff tops. And, I do need to state that the RAF base, I don't condone anyone going out there. It is private property and, people will get prosecuted for trespassing. So I'm not advising anyone to go out there. And obviously on the cliff tops, it's a pretty dangerous place to go out at night. But the phenomenon seems to be the epicenter around this RAF base. You've got many, many, many accounts of people seeing structured craft over the base. There was one story by a South African RAF pilot who was, you've got a lot of endangered species of birds that nest along the cliff tops. So it attracts a lot of people. You've got an RSPB reserve literally probably 500 yards away from this RAF base that sits on the hill. And, they were walking back and he said, he saw this sphere right over the RAF base. And he said it was like a dirty grey in colour. And his wife, knowing his RAF background, said, "What's that?" And on initially seeing it, he thought it was a barrage balloon. So they're walking towards it, and he's watched this sphere kind of change from this dirty grey colour to this brilliant white. And he said, there was no sort of thought in his head at the time that it was a UFO. They've looked away, something caught their attention. They've looked back and this sphere's gone. Now, you also have a lot of rock anglers that fish off the cliff tops. And for years and years, people have alluded to seeing these orange orbs out at sea. And these things will appear, they'll disappear randomly, reappear somewhere else. There's all kinds of stuff going on there. And, even recently, one of the farmers had sheep on one of the fields. And I think it's been said that he lost over 60 sheep in over a 2-year period. And these sheep display all the characteristics of the usual mutilations, jaw straps removed, eyes removed as if they've been sucked out by, a vacuum cleaner, reproductive organs are, missing. I need to ascertain as well that there's never any blood. Paul's work in looking for marks of something that we know to be a predator attacking these sheep. There's no signs of that. And it's a very, very strange place. And I say I went to wild camp there last October. And we went with a few friends up there and we had a look around the RAF base and we stayed for a couple of nights. And on the Saturday night, we wild camped in the woods where there's been a sighting of this dogman, or werewolf, whatever you want to call it. And as we're returning home on the Sunday, I get a message off Paul, and it's to say that there was a deer mutilated pretty much about a mile away from where we camped. And, you see these deer, they're big animals. If something was to attack a deer, they'd put up one hell of a fight. And again, there's no signs of struggle. The ears are almost surgically removed off this animal. And, it's a very weird place, but it displays all the characteristics which have made the ranch in Utah famous. So I think there's probably a lot of these places dotted around the world where, these dimensions intersect. I find it all very interesting.
And I'm glad that you mentioned Jason Gleaves earlier. He has helped a bunch with stuff that I've caught on cameras, etc. And some of us have seen there in the basin. So props to Jason. He's very good at what he does.
Well, Jason was the guy who mentored me very early on. He's actually the chap that I sent the photos of the marks on my back to. It was only recently when he was attempting to rebuild his PC that he stumbled across them. Because, I've mentioned about these markings on various other interviews that I've done. But without the pictures, as you know yourself, evidence seems to speak louder. So to get these photos back, and obviously Jason's analysed them and brought out a little bit more detail in them, is, it backs up what I've said and adds credibility to my story.
Yeah, he's a good guy, and your story is amazing. It is so amazing, and there are so many significant similarities. The deer instance that I've looked into that situation, the deer instance that you're mentioning, there are various cases of these, for all intents and purposes, mutilated deer. It's really quite wild, isn't it?
Yeah, it's disturbing. Especially when this is happening only, a short distance away from the patch that you camped in. Now, when we went there, we went to a place called Flamborough Head, which is a little bit up on the coastline from Bempton. We just parked up the van. We exited the van, got out to stretch our legs and have a look around, and we saw a low-flying orb. And this thing's probably, flying as in the same height as aircraft when it's coming into land. Again, silent. Took a video of this with another friend that I was there with. And as you zoom into this, you can almost see like an energy within this orb. Very, very strange. Now, Paul and filmmaker Chris Turner released a documentary last year called Bringing Down the Light. Fantastic documentary. I'd recommend anyone to get it. Got to give them a quick shout out. So it's available on don'tmentionthereptilians.com. And this documentary centres around, obviously, the Benton phenomenon. And there is a free YouTube documentary on, I think it's on YouTube and Vimeo and a few other things, called The Benton Phenomenon, if anyone wants to go and look that up. And it gives a really good overview of events that are going on there. But the documentary they released last year, he has there's a witness on there who claims to have worked for the RAF in the 80s. And I'll go into the RAF base a little bit deeper because it's quite significant. And he claims that he had an occult background. He was hired once they learned about his psychic abilities. And he was stationed around RAF base even to try and capture what was going on there. And he said the government at the time was aware of 3 ET races that were using the base somewhat as a doorway to come through. And you go around the base and then there's various videos on YouTube where, you know, these urban explorers have gone into, and you go down into the tunnels of this RAF base and there's erotic art displayed all over the walls. And I'm not talking about some graffiti that a bunch of teenagers have done on a Friday night. This is detailed pornographic art, and it's displayed all over these walls. Now, Paul has touched upon this in the documentary, but said, you know, for obvious reasons, he didn't want to go into depth. But it's believed the RAF base was used in the late 80s for satanic rituals. And there's a lot of pictograms and other occult markings in the tunnels of this base, along with this erotic art. And he's actually got someone who speaks on film where I think as teenagers, you know, they ventured down into these tunnels and they saw the remnants of someone having a fire there, and they found these cloaks. And he said they brought the cloaks out into the daylight. And he said, you could understand these weren't cheaply made things. These were proper stitched cloth. They weren't, you know, like a pillowcase with a couple of holes in. But a lot of the locals around there, you see, it's not a place where they readily accept outsiders. So a lot of people won't talk about the satanic element to what went on there. Now, the witness who claims to have worked looking into the activity around the RAF base states that these occult groups may have known about the phenomenon that existed there and were possibly trying to harness that energy for, you know, speculative reasons we can speculate about. But it's a very, very strange place, and you kind of got to go there yourself to feel the energy. It's still a story that's unfolding as well. I believe they've got a new film coming out this year with a new witness. So I'll look forward to seeing that. And I'm hoping to get back up to Benton in the spring and hopefully camp out for a few days. And, you know, very, very similar to the ranch, you know, you'll get activity where it comes in bursts. And a lot of this phenomenon is seen, and then it will go quiet for months on end and you don't see anything. So you've kind of got to be in the right place at the right time. And, you know, we'll go out there because I believe, you know, you've got to get out to these places. It's no good sitting watching YouTube documentaries. You know, if you want to know about this phenomenon, you've got to be hands-on. So we'll go out there. Hopefully we'll meet up with Paul. I'd highly recommend perhaps you look into getting Paul to speak on your podcast, because his knowledge and his research is absolutely second to none. I've got no reservations when it comes to Paul's work whatsoever. He's a straight-up individual. I say he's not a young man anymore, which I hope he doesn't mind me saying, but he's out on these fields on the cliff tops 5 o'clock every morning. You know, the man's pretty much dedicated his life to studying and trying to capture what's going on out there. And you've even got a sighting as fresh as the weekend just gone, and I'll read this to you briefly. And this was sent in to Paul, and it's titled "A Cliff-Top Werewolf." And it says, and I quote, "While Bob Brown and I were at Benton, the RSPB reserve, at 7 a.m. this morning to meet up with a couple who visited the area for the first time. They contacted me Friday evening after observing what they can only describe as a huge canine-type creature set off on a scar of the cliff top jutting out to the sea. The male of the couple is 6 feet tall, and they both say this animal was over 6 foot tall, seated. They had a selection of cameras with them, including an infrared camera. None of them was able to pick up the creature, even though the cameras could see the cliff tops clearly." So that's a sighting again of this Dogman as recent as this weekend just gone. So this stuff is current and it's happening to this day. Again, very, very similar to what's been going on Skinwalker Ranch.
There's other projects as well that seem to have similarities, like ATIP, OSAP.
Yeah.
What have you come across that has been similar to that?
Well, we go into the recent stuff regarding ATIP and TTSA, and I started looking at this and the involvement of Mr. Bigelow, Mr. Robert Bigelow, who obviously purchased Skinwalker Ranch back in around 1995. So I created somewhat of a timeline of events to show how all this is intertwined. So Bigelow buys the ranch, I believe, around the time of 1995. And I think he purchased it for about $200,000, which was relatively cheap. And he moved his NIDS team of scientists onto the ranch, and they were there to study the events that were going on at the ranch. So you've got NIDS, which is the National Institute for Discovery of Science, which was created around 1995 and ran till about 2004. A couple of the guys that were involved with NIDS was Deputy Administrator Colin Kelleher and astrophysicist Eric Davis. So 2004, NIDS is shut down, and it was then replaced by BASS, which is Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies. The assumption being that BASS had a more clandestine mission statement than NIDS, and also a government sponsor on the horizon. 2005, you had the release of the infamous book, Hunt for the Skinwalker by George Knapp and Colin Kelleher. Fantastic book. I think it's got far more in it than Jeremy Corbell's film, although Corbell's film is an important part in this. I'd recommend anyone to read the book. So 2007, you have an unnamed agent from the DIA who contacts Robert Bigelow and requests to see the ranch in person. Robert Bigelow obliges, and the agent has a personalised close encounter on the ranch. He then reports his experience to his superiors, which was the initial catalyst for Senator Harry Reid appropriating the $22 million for the Skinwalker Ranch, which was obviously the story that broke in December 2016. So you fast forward to 2007, and this was the creation of ORSAP, which later, I believe, went on to become the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program. Get my tongue working. So the $22 million, which is a drop in the ocean, I believe was partially funded by events that went on at the ranch. So you're looking at the similarities, if you will, of Bigelow's involvement from all the phenomenon that was seen on the ranch to obviously this ORSAP and later ATIP. And you know, you go into it, and the one thing that's always stood out for me was there was an interview with Robert Bigelow done by 60 Minutes, I believe. And Bigelow, you know, he's not one to give a lot of interviews. I think he's only given a handful. And he doesn't necessarily like talking about the ranch because of all the stuff going on. So the interview goes, the interviewer asks Mr. Bigelow, do you believe in aliens? To which Robert Bigelow says, I'm absolutely convinced that that's all there is to it. And the interviewer then asks, so do you believe that UFOs have come from Earth? Robert Bigelow then goes on to say, there has been an existing presence, an ET presence, and I've spent millions and millions. I've probably spent more as an individual than anyone else in the US has ever spent on the subject. The interviewer then goes on to say, is it risky for you to say in public that you believe in UFOs and aliens? Bigelow responded with, I don't give a damn, I don't care. The interviewer then says, you don't worry that some people will say, did you hear that guy? He sounds crazy. Bigelow then replies, I don't care. Why not? Bigelow says, it's not going to make a big difference. It's not going to change the reality of what I know. So the interviewer then asks him, do you imagine that in our space travels that we'll encounter other forms of intelligent life? And this is the important bit in this interview. So Bigelow replies with, you don't have to go anywhere. So the interviewer says, you can find it here? To which Bigelow replies, yes. Where exactly? Bigelow says, it's right under people's noses, which I think is a very telling thing to say and perhaps coincides with what we were talking about, the interdimensional aspect of all of this. So we fast forward to 2016, which was Tom DeLonge starts to come out of the shadows from, obviously he was the front man of the rock band Blink-182. And I listened to an interview, I think it was on Jimmy Church's Fade to Black. And he's talking to Jimmy, and, you know, he sort of had all these claims that he'd gained considerable access to top-level military personnel. And he also mentions that he's been advised, although at that point he wasn't at liberty to name these people, which we later know was Lou Elizondo. So shortly after, the WikiLeaks hacked emails of Hillary Clinton in a campaign with Donald Trump surface, where these conversations, Tom DeLonge and Chief of Staff John Podesta. Now, it's important to state that John Podesta has been somewhat of a public campaigner for disclosure. It goes on to say that a series of meetings was held over the internet between DeLonge and Podesta. And he mentioned he enlisted the help of, I think it was General William McCasland, and former commander of the Air Force Research Lab, in helping him hone his message to the youth. So we fast forward, and then you've got Hillary Clinton is on a show in the States called Jimmy Kimmel, where she discusses her husband's attempts to gain access to the secret classified UFO files and was denied. So Jimmy Kimmel asks her, we had your former president, or we had your husband, former President Bill Clinton, on the show, I asked him about UFOs and Area 51 and if he'd looked into it. As if I was president, that's the first thing I would do. I would go right to those files and see what was going on. And he said he did that and he didn't find anything. To which Hillary then replies, well, I'm going to do it again. And there's a new name, unexplained aerial phenomenon, UAP. That's the latest nomenclature. That was around March 2016, and we go on to, I think it was around the time of October 27, and Tom DeLonge has obviously thrust into the public spotlight, and he announced the creation of this group of individuals from various intelligence personnel called To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science. And you've got some very important people that, he's gone to seek advice. Such names as Jem Semivan, who's his Vice President of Operations. You've got Dr. Hal Puthoff, who was the co-founder and Vice President of Science and Technology. And, you've got Steve Justice, who's the Chief Operating Officer of the Aerospace Division. And, these are all, if you look into these names, they've all got important parts to play in this TTSA thing. And none more so than Lou Elizondo. And, Lou Elizondo's background was he's a career intelligence officer. A lot of experience in the US Army in the Department of Defense, and was involved with the National Counterintelligence as a former special agent. So obviously it's come to light that Lou was headed the ATIP, Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program. And there's been a lot of back and forth about, obviously, Lou Elizondo's involvement. There's been some telling statements made by the Pentagon, even more so recently. And, I must commend the brilliant work that John Greenwald has accomplished in scrutinising TTSA, because there seems to be an awful lot of smoke and mirrors, if I can call it that. Whether Lou had the involvement that he did, I don't know. From what I do understand, I would say that, that there is something going on within the government at the moment where there are people who want to bring this subject to public attention because they believe it's a national defence threat. And there are people, perhaps for reasons as we spoke of earlier, the religious aspects of this, that don't want this information to be out there to the public. So, you look at it quite... You've got to look at this objectively, and the way I look at this, Ryan, is TTSA, and you look at them as a collective and what they've achieved, and pretty much from when that article was broke in the New York Times, they changed the conversation, and they changed how this subject was perceived on a mainstream level. Whereas, you know yourself, and it's probably the same in America. You had a UFO story that ran on, the 6 o'clock news, and it was always played with the X-Files music, and it was always like they were kind of making us all out to be Fruit Loops, and, we all wear tinfoil hats and watch Star Trek episodes on repeat. So, yeah, and I say, I saw Richard Dolan speak last November, and a lot of his talk was based on, this, if you want to call it a disclosure effort. I know people have said it's disclosure with a little d rather than a capital D. But as a group, for all the criticisms that they faced and, all the toing and froing, I think they've brought this into the spotlight, and rightly so. And, you had stories running last year where the US Navy has introduced, an official protocol for pilots who witness this type of phenomenon, where they've actually got a place to go to report these sightings where they won't be ridiculed. So, you look at what they're trying to do, and, whether they've got, individual agendas, being from intelligence backgrounds, that's open to interpretation. But, I want to go to, there was an interview that John Greenwald of the blackfolk.com had recently acquired an interview with Lou Elizondo. As you know yourself, John's been very critical of Lou's involvement. Last year, the Pentagon kind of went back on their initial statement about ATIP, where they claimed that ATIP didn't actually investigate UFOs or UAPs, and Elizondo had no involvement. Lou, for various reasons, is not someone who makes himself accessible to the UFO community. I understand his reasons why, and he's touched upon them, that, they don't want to, they don't want differing opinions from what they're trying to concentrate their efforts on, because, there's so many opinions to what this phenomenon could be, that I think it's important to stick to what they're focusing on. And, the tagline seems to be, if this is a national defence issue and it's a threat to, the United States of America and all over the world. So the interview with John Greenwald, he finally got Lou Elizondo to speak, and Lou goes on to say, "I chose to speak with you simply because you asked me. I never turned down a sincere offer to clarify or provide my perspective. I'm not interested in social media drama or artificially manufactured angst, and so I usually stay quiet if I have something productive to say." Lou goes on to say, "I gave the Pentagon ample time to deconflict their response and given them the benefit of the doubt that its dysfunction over Palace. Unfortunately, I no longer feel this is necessarily the case, and therefore it is incumbent upon me to set the record straight. I am also aware that I still have a clearance, and I don't want the Pentagon taking any punitive measures to risk my clearance or our ongoing efforts regarding the CRADA. I had my clearance threatened early on, and I don't want that being used as leverage to keep me quiet. But it is a possibility that he could still try and remove my clearance in order to try and further discredit me." So this interview is very telling, because it goes on to say, John basically asked him to set the record straight as regards to his involvement and what his role was actively within ATIP. So Lou goes on to say, "As the senior ranking person in the ATIP program, I was ultimately responsible for ensuring the efficient and effective operations of the overall effort. However, in fairness, the lion's work was performed by the outstanding men and women we had working in the program. My job was primarily to fend off the distractions so the rest of the team could do their job. In essence, my job was to catch the proverbial bullet so our folks could do their jobs without distraction. Not an unusual role for a senior person in any program to assume. This also includes fighting for resources, support and personnel." So John goes on to say that he's pointed out on numerous occasions that there have been a lot of reservations, accepting ATIP was truly a UFO program. And
that changed in May 2019 when the New York Post published the Pentagon's admission that it didn't study UAPs. Fast forward to December 2019, just last year, and a Pentagon statement that was released to John and the Black Vault, they basically rescinded everything, where they went on to say neither ATIP or ORSAP were UAP related, said Pentagon spokesperson Susan Goff. The purpose of ATIP was to investigate foreign advanced aerospace weapons system applications with future technology projections over the next 40 years and to create a centre of expertise on advanced aerospace technology. So, needless to say, there was a lot of confusion after that statement, and there was a lot of people calling Lou out, and in some sense, rightly so. So, Lou Elizondo's response to that was, it was not about advanced aircraft, it was indeed about UFOs, UAPs. There is additional information that clearly indicates ATIP's focus being UAP. I don't think that info has been made public just yet, but I'm certain it is forthcoming. There is documentation that provides no doubt as to what our focus was. So the interview I thought was very telling. It goes on, Lou goes on to say emotionally, and he's reacting to this Pentagon statement where they're trying to discredit him and ATIP and ORSAP. And Lou goes on to say emotionally it was very disappointing, but not entirely surprising. There are elements in the Pentagon that are seriously upset with me for breaking rank in their eyes. However, efforts are underway to isolate and expose these individuals and hold them accountable. I am very optimistic that 2020 this will be resolved. I can't go into great detail on our strategy only because it has not been finalised yet. I think it's a vendetta by a few in the Pentagon, but I think we all know the real reason this year. So when it goes on to say, although Elizondo will not elaborate on the measures he is currently taking to counter back, he did remind us all about the truth that the American people know all too well: the US government lies. We look to that and, time and time again, the US government has been caught out numerous times throughout history. What you ascertain from that is, the Pentagon have come out, they've tried to pour cold water on the whole ATIP ORSAP scenario, that they were looking into this type of phenomenon and trying to discredit Lou Elizondo. And now you've got this interview with Lou Elizondo basically saying, well, there's people that aren't happy with the fact that he resigned from office, where, he's spoken on, I think it was the show Unidentified, where he says that he wasn't satisfied with the efforts they were going to in looking into this. So my gut feeling is that there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. Obviously, if these documents do come into fruition this year, then hopefully that clears up Lou's involvement with ATIP and ORSAP, and that these programs were actively looking into UAPs and UFOs. So, there's a lot more information to come, but I tend to believe that, Lou's telling the truth. And of course, we've been here before. The UFO community is no stranger to being misled. You had, I think it was Bill Moore that, came out and, it was later proved that, he was fed disinformation to put out to the UFO community. So, I understand people's skepticism. It's important to look at both sides of the coin. But, you have to look what DeLong and TTSA have achieved in a relatively short space of time. For want of a better word, as you know yourself, subject to ufology in the UFO community, has been chasing its tail for for years and years, and it's the same cases going on and on and on. And they're still talking about things like Rendlesham Forest and the incident that happened there in 1980, and this is 39 years on. So people are still going over the same old ground while all this other stuff's going on in the background. And you look, if they've, say the word, fast-tracked this subject, and okay, they rebranded it UAP, and I believe the reason for it being UAP is so it hasn't got the stigma of the UFO word. And of course, when you're dealing with Congress and you're briefing these people, I suppose you want to get away from that whole stigma. And, as I touched upon the reasons, the UFOs as a subject and this phenomenon hasn't been received greatly by mainstream media in the past, and it's always been, kind of like the dirty little secret. And, we've been all sort of been made out to be kind of crazies, you know what I mean? Or, we've got mental health issues or whatnot. So, I understand the reasons for doing that, but, if I was to be having this conversation with you, say, 10 years ago, and you tell me we'd be at this point in 2020, I'd have laughed you out the building, but, here we are. What the future holds for TTSA, I know they've got their entertainment side, and there's the release of books, and I think there's a new season commissioned of Unidentified, which will come onto our screens this year. So I understand that side of it, but then, you look at the other side of what TTSA is doing, and, they just created the Adam Research Project. And a little statement I pulled from TTSA's website, and it goes on to say, from time to time, various sources are collecting material samples reported to have come from advanced aerospace vehicles of unknown origin, popularly known as UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon, or UFOs. Those sources include private citizens, foreign aerospace investigatory committees, aerospace operators, and government associations. As these materials have come to light, they can be made available for inspection. And it goes on to say, given the potential significance of such findings, To the Stars Academy has made it a Tier 1 priority to use its resources to subject these materials to detailed and rigorous scientific evaluation whenever feasible. As soon as TTSA Academy is notified that materials are available, a thorough effort will be made to document their origin and credibility, followed by the establishment of chain of custody procedures and ownership protocols. In addition to reviewing these materials for their potential significance as evidence of exotic origin, the analysis will evaluate materials for such characteristics as exceptional strength, lightweight build, and any unusual advanced properties that potentially could contribute to the development of exciting new technologies in the future. As a first step, TTSA has established a contract with EarthTech International, a well-respected research think tank in Austin, Texas, to evaluate the properties of the available materials under the leadership of Dr. Harold E. Putoff, a former senior advisor and subcontractor to the Pentagon's ATIP program and current vice president of technology for TTSA. EarthTech is well positioned to head up this materials research plan. So I think they're doing lots of good stuff, and I don't know if you agree with this.
Everybody has ignored things that go bump in the night or lights in the sky, and all of a sudden those are sort of being legitimized.
This has been, when you look at it, pretty much 3 years they've pushed this to, the top of the food chain, really. And they put this out there, and regularly, I don't think a week goes by now that I don't see in one of the mainstream websites a story that's running on either ATIP, the Nimitz encounter with the Tic Tac UFO, or Commander Fravor or something. This has created so much interest. I think it's only healthy, and it's attracting a lot of people's attention that probably wouldn't have looked at this subject with the same kind of eyes as what they do now, because of the way this was talked about. It was ridiculed, and if you looked into this, it wasn't something that you could talk about with your friends. Research was pretty much privately done because people were scared to put out there that a lot of this stuff was going on, and who do you talk to it about?
Or there's all of a sudden these things being declassified, these documents, these organizations, these projects, these individuals who have PhDs behind their name. All of a sudden, it's mainstream, and it's great. Your friends can't say, the friends that I speak to, they say, oh yeah, I saw that on the news.
Absolutely, and there was you're talking about release statements. One that's no more important is JWICS, which in January of last year, the Defence Intelligence Agency released a list of 38 research titles pursued by the programme in response to a Freedom of Information Act, which was put in by Stephen Aftergood, Director of Federation of American Scientists. And the topics were traversable wormholes, stargates, and negative energy, and it was led by Dr. Eric Davis, who was obviously involved with NIDS, which we alluded to earlier. And, they looked into things such as invisibility cloaking, and I believe this was headed by a German scientist by the name of Walt Leonhardt, who was a professor at the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel. Leinhardt's research pertains to theoretical quantum optics, and I believe in 2006 his work on theoretically creating an invisible hole in space inside which objects can be hidden was cited by Nature, yet another title, Warp Drive, Dark Energy, and the Manipulation of Extra Dimensions. So you've got all this stuff going on in the background, and this is, again, for me, further evidence that the stuff which we've been discussing this evening on this podcast is stuff that they have been taken seriously, and it has been being looked into. Whether that's a consequence, and it goes back to the premise of the events that happened on Skinwalker Ranch. I think that's quite incredible, don't you?
Yeah, there's so much going on. It's magic, really, with these secret machines that Tom DeLonge speaks of in his books, and the parallels that we have with other places on the planet. I think there's a quest going on, and there's a very, there's a presence. There's a presence that didn't used to be there, and with the realization of OSAP, ATIP, and particular areas, I wanted to appreciate you coming on. And how can our listeners stay in touch with what you've got going on and happening in the future?
Yeah, so at the moment, I know you mentioned Jason Gleaves earlier. We're actually in the process, although it's in its infancy, of looking into producing a documentary, which should detail a lot of the historical UFO sightings that have gone on in our neck of the woods, where I live now, which is North Wales. I say it's in its infancy. There's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of pieces of the jigsaw which are scattered around at the moment. which over time will be put into place. You know, something people will enjoy as well. So that's going on, I think, in the next year or so. Obviously, I'm going to still be keeping an eye on, you know, things with ATIP and TTSA, and checking out a lot of the stuff that's going on there. You know, I've got my website, which is a Facebook page called ufology.uk. So feel free to contact me there. If anyone wants to get into discussion about any of this that we've talked about tonight, you know, I'd be happy to do so. We'll see what the future holds. But, you know, for the time being, I think it's important to kind of watch how this all plays out. I think there's a lot more information that we might possibly see this year. And again, you know, many of these, you know, jigsaw pieces to this whole ATIP, ORSAP and TTSA thing, you know, hopefully there's going to be more information that's going to be forthcoming as alludes to that.
I couldn't agree more. So happy that we finally made this podcast happen, and I hope to have you on soon again.
Yeah, definitely, man. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Well, there you have it. Let the bell ring, let the angels sing. We got Spivey in the background doing Strange Objects. From Chief's Hideout is the name of the album. It's worth every penny. This is the most killer album. I remember first receiving this album in the Uinta Basin of Utah, and it said Skinwalker music on the outside. It's excellent. Chief's Hideout, Spivey. You can find it on iTunes and anywhere fine music is sold. Also, check out heroparanormal.com. Check out heroparanormal.podbean.com if you want to download that with a quickness and a sickness.
Song, I know you couldn't stay long. I know what you would say. This was a secular song. I know you couldn't stay long. I know what you would say. This was a secular song. I know they